you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly what's going to happen when AI is implemented or if people are going to get laid off. But you need to address the elephant in the room, and you need to address it from a storytelling perspective to connect with people emotionally. And that's when you get buy-in and you kind of take people on that journey with you. Let me show you this journey of AI. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Let me tell you, I'm afraid as well. And you have so little vulnerability at the leadership level oftentimes, where they're afraid as well, but they don't recognize it or they don't share that with employees. And this is what I talked about earlier in creating psychological safety. It has to come with these elements.
Welcome to Pioneers, the show where we explore the intersection between humanity and AI. I'm your host, Ankur Patel. Over the last 10 years, I've built 3 AI startups, written 2 books about the subject, and I run a weekly AI newsletter. I also regularly teach and speak about the topic at conferences. This technology has grown faster than I think any of us could have imagined, and it's making us ask really important questions, such as how ethical is AI? What will this technology look like in a few years, let alone a few months? And most importantly, does it have the power to truly change the world? And what does it mean for you? On this show, I'll be interviewing the founders, operators, and pioneers that are introducing AI into their companies and industries. We'll be asking them the really heavy-hitting questions that make them dig deep into the core of what we do. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Ankur Patel, and my guest today is Kamalas Lardi, CEO at Lardy and Partner Consulting. Kamalas, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So could you tell us a little bit more about your own professional experience and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. I started my career off, in the late 90s as a coder, actually, but very quickly moved on into management consulting. I've worked with companies like Accenture. I was the head of Deloitte Digital in Switzerland and started my own consulting company 12 years ago. And since then, we focus on digital transformation and emerging tech. And we've implemented over 50 transformation projects across the globe, across industries. It's been an exciting journey, I have to say. So I was in the corporate side, shifting over to entrepreneurship and consulting with companies at different levels across the globe. It's been quite an exciting journey. I'm also a lecturer at different institutions, and I love writing. So I've written 3 books so far, 2 of the most recent ones around the human side of transformation, as well as AI for business, which will be launched in April.
It's such a fascinating area because I think a lot of the adoption, especially in the spaces that, for example, multimodal plays in, which are finance and insurance, it's not that the technology doesn't exist. Even if technology didn't change one bit, particularly around say generative AI, that doesn't mean that that businesses will adopt immediately, right? There are many other aspects to adoption beyond the technology being ripe and ready, and a lot of them have to do with people and the organization and getting that deep buy-in. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how much does neuroscience play into digital transformation and adoption?
The neuroscience aspect plays a huge role, and it's almost an area that's less recognized, particularly for technologists like myself. Coming from, the tech industry, we do tend to focus a lot on the tangibles, the nuts and bolts and the implementation of technology. And I started my career off in that same way, where, we had this belief that if you build it, people will come to it. And I think very early on, I realized that wasn't going to happen. We have to build things that people use. And then the mindset shifted over to understanding what people need and then building according to that. And so as my journey went along, it triggered me to write the book, The Human Side of Digital Business Transformation, because this was truly my deeper understanding. And I wanted to put that out in the world, in the business world particularly, that it's not just about technology implementation. In order for companies to really survive and thrive in the digital economy, you've got to apply this technology within a space where people are using that technology, they're adopting and advocating for it. You've got the processes and the organization structures around that. You've got the business model aligned to it, basically shifting your entire organization towards this digital future. And this is where many companies tend to fall short. And so I wanted to make sure that this journey was clear for organizations.
Over the course of your career, I'm sure you've seen so many inflection points: the internet, mobile, big data, business intelligence taking hold, machine learning, all the things that are coming out now with generative AI. Is there a common
pattern or theme around how technology gets introduced and then eventually adopted by enterprise?
There's always the hype cycle, not necessarily the one that Gartner puts out there, but there's always this hype cycle. If you think back a couple of years, the blockchain was a big topic of discussion, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, crypto tech. And then we went into this metaverse cycle where that was the big talk of the business community. And AI hit somewhere in 2022. And so now we're on this AI hype trend. The trends are always going to come and go. And I think for organizations, the important element is really understanding which of these trends are impactful for your business today and in the future, and how best to leverage those technologies. And you're working as an organization with limited funds, limited resources, limited time, limited capabilities. In addition to running daily business, you've got to look at these projects and implementations. And so organizations need to be really, really laser focused in terms of where they put their energy and resources and effort. And you can't implement every technology that's going to hit that hype cycle. So you really need to think about how this is applied. And one of the biggest challenges I think I've seen within organizations is implementing the tech. It's not a 5-day, it's out there and you've implemented it. Within an organization, there are so many dependencies and interactions and capabilities that need to, that sometimes turn this, it could be a simple generative AI implementation, but within a larger organization, it could become a 1-year implementation just because you've got, dot all your I's and cross all your T's and make sure you've got your ducks in a row, get everything sorted out so that it's being applied in the best way possible within your business environment. And so this is a big challenge for companies, and it's probably one of the reasons why companies are seeing the realization of benefits from technologies such as AI far less than what they expected initially.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. There's hype and then there's some disillusionment, right? And then somewhere in between, maybe that's where the real trend lies. And I mean, if you look at the internet, same thing. There's this big flurry in the public markets, a lot of capital being drawn, a lot of companies getting started. You have massive bust, right, which coincided with the recession, and then out of that emerged more durable internet businesses, right? And it wasn't like the internet was a fad, but there's a lot of hype and disillusionment along the way to get to where we are, right? To kind of see that way through. And then sometimes the hype is just hype. There's disillusionment and never recovers, right? Quite as you expect. So I think there's this fear of like, you put your neck out there in a way that ultimately might be, for a lot of individuals, it could be career ending or career impacting in adverse ways. So it's not just let's go lean in and take advantage of it, because there's fear of like maybe stepping too far, putting your neck out too much in that. And I think that's where a lot of that neuroscience comes in. So I guess my question to you is, 2 years in, right, in generative AI, we had ChatGPT kind of really get people excited. There was like this FOMO and fervor that we typically don't see even among enterprise, that is more akin to what you see in consumer. How much of that is still very much intact? So companies are excited, experimenting, getting value, versus maybe some disillusionment that's creeping in because, as you mentioned earlier, some of the expectations are not being met after 2 years of experiment.
Where I'm seeing many of the organizations that I'm working with and interacting with is they've hit this point of reality bites where now they've got, the hype has hit. Their organization has decided to take sort of this AI journey, develop an AI strategy, and now that they're at the point of facing implementation and scalability or operationalizing their implementations. And this is where it's becoming these very dynamic technologies and rapidly changing technologies are becoming then projects within organizations. And that's where the challenge lies, because the projects within organizations tend to have a longer decision cycle, a longer implementation cycle. It tends to have kind of a start date and an end date with a certain fixed budget. Whereas sometimes you need this exploration phase, which it's more challenging to explore and experiment within a traditional organization structure environment. And so I think the point where it is, or I've experienced or observed this, is the point where it is now. Many of these organizations have now delegated this technology implementation and project to a certain team or group or individual, and that person's holding the the weight of having to implement this in the next year. So I truly sympathize with that. We are also helping organizations, working with banks, financial, consumer finance companies, as well as governments as well, to look at how can we implement AI in an effective way. And so we recognize the challenges, and we have certain ways or advised to approach that as well.
What's your typical template look like for new organizations that are putting together an AI strategy, perhaps with an AI budget, and they're just getting started?
The first starting point is not the use case. I'd like to stress this because many companies start with use cases. We start with business value, and that typically falls within building or growth or scalability, productivity, and efficiency. It might go into engaging with customers in a deeper way or a more sophisticated way. So you start with this business value, and you try to identify what are the business challenges you want to address. And the first question is always, is this the technology to address that business challenge? And it could be that maybe AI isn't the solution. And what we're seeing within many organizations, I want to stress this as well, some of these implementations that we're seeing are technologies that are not new. They've been around for the last decade. So robotics process automation, for example, AI for decision making, and those kinds of analytics-based solutions, they've been around for a while. It's only now that organizations have recognized the possibilities, and we've got some tools and capabilities that can accelerate these functions. And so my first advice is always start with that business value. Look at the question or the challenge you want to address within your business. What's your critical priority? Is this a technology that's going to help you solve that question or that give you the answers you're looking for? And then go into structuring exploration phase. So let's take a small piece, a section of this business or this business challenge, and let's implement this technology and let's test the market, test the waters and see, is this what we want to head toward? In order to do that, you need to have management buy-in. You need to have certain appetite for exploration, because the outcome of that exploration or that proof of concept could be it's not going to work, or this isn't the solution for us. And you've got to be ready to accept that and say, okay, let's pivot and try something else. But if you come from this approach, you'll always have a solution that's being implemented that links back to direct business value.
I mean, I love that because I think you highlight a couple of great points, which is in many ways, this needs to be business led, right? And I think some organizations believe that since this technology that is being worked on and implemented, that IT and engineering should take the lead, but then it becomes disassociated with business impact. And you might not even get the buy-in at the highest levels of the organization that you need. I think that deeply resonates. And I think the other big thing is like the use cases are come out of what's most important to the organization, right? I think you highlighted that, and it's interesting because some of the older technologies that you mentioned, like predictive AI, like you just conventional machine learning, RPA, they've been around, but in some ways, this like AI hype cycle is now pulling them back into the forefront, which is like we have multiple levers, not just generative AI and large language models. There are more things we could do. It's more about which technology is best suited to solve the problem at hand, right? But you're having much deeper conversations because you have maybe more top-down buy-in at the highest levels to go and invest in this because it's not such a frontier technology. It's now becoming much more mainstream.
And just to add to that as well, Ankur, there's an aspect of neuroscience that comes into play here as well. So when you talked about in many organizations, AI is led by the tech team or IT. And what I've observed is groupthink is a key, it's a psychological aspect as well, where you have the business saying, well, IT should know, they are the experts in technology, so we're just going to go along with what they decide. And then it comes to a point where a solution is implemented and they realize, okay, this isn't actually working for us. And so they have less of a pushback because they think the experts are leading us, whereas the experts are not looking at it from a business perspective and from a business value delivery. And so this is where we sometimes find projects being implemented and then being rolled back because it's not being assessed properly and it's not being pushed from the right direction.
Yeah, I think some of that friction between business and engineering and IT is very healthy, right? Because you then have two independent parties that are negotiating what things to work on, how to look at what success and what success looks like, how to measure that. And then they have different things they have to consider. Maybe business side wants a faster implementation cycle, and then IT and engineering are thinking more about long-term durability and security. And so there's going to be inherent friction. I think the more friction there is, in some ways, the better, because that means that people are having really meaningful conversations and negotiating versus like that groupthink phenomena that you pointed out earlier.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really important as well is with AI, for example, the level of capability and knowledge that's required from the business side in order to push back and have those conversations and have that dialogue with IT, that's perhaps missing with AI-based technology. So having the background in kind of building up your skill sets and in AI, in generative AI, in not just the use of these technologies, but also the risks associated with implementing these technologies and how they could be applied within a business setting. And so the level of upskilling that I see many organizations needing to implement first before they can effectively implement their AI strategy, that's one of the key gaps that I'm seeing in the market.
So let's say business goes through this motion. They have the business values. They get the right parties in play. They eventually get to use cases and such. Where do they go next typically? Do they decide to then build with internal resources and execute according to the plan? Do they lean on consulting firms that could help with the implementation? Perhaps Accenture, of course, has been one of the big winners when it comes to capturing some of the dollars around the AI hype cycle. Or do they, go and search for some different software vendors that could potentially help them accelerate that journey?
I think one of the key advices I would give organizations is never depend on external organizations for these key skills. Um, Technologies like AI are going to be part of your business long term if it's implemented well and if it's used in a kind of business driven perspective. So build those capabilities internally. Don't create dependencies with external structures. And so what I'm seeing in the market, and it's kind of counterproductive because my company's consulting as well. But this is what I really say to clients: you've got to have your own internal capabilities. We as consultants are here to upskill you and prepare you and kind of kick you off on that journey, but you've got to take that journey because it's your organization. And so take the lead in those implementations. That's one element. The second element is really start looking at operationalizing. So if you've got this pilot or proof of concept and you realize you want to go ahead with this implementation, really look at how you can effectively implement it within your organization, what kind of dependencies might be created, what kind of interactions you might need. And typically you would see kind of cross-business function, stakeholder participation being very important in this sense. So you go down this route of, I would say a traditional technology implementation, but with the human factor as a priority. And this is where, one of the things we prioritize in implementations is bringing in various stakeholders, making sure that we have the right buy-in. And that's also where the neuroscience aspect plays such an important role in getting the buy-in, getting people on board, and basically engaging throughout the journey of this implementation.
Yeah, it's incredible how much selling even internally needs to happen to make all of this work, right? So let's say you have a champion, maybe it's a business champion. That business champion really wants something to come alive and to the teams to not only build it out and test it, but then implement it. They have to get a lot of buy-in from different areas of the business, including the people that would be affected by some of the changes. Because if they don't go through that process, getting buy-in from the different influencers, the decision makers, and check writers, and gatekeepers, that implementation may not come alive, right? And so that's like the human aspect of it. It's not just the technology. It's about how do you maneuver through the human aspects of a complex organization to get a technology adopted to impact the business.
Absolutely. And that human aspect comes down to understanding what motivates people, but also how they make decisions and what elements impact those decisions. And this is where, me personally, I went on that journey of truly trying to understand change management aspects and trying to understand why organizations were still failing. We had like an over 80% failure rate or falling short of digital transformation success for many organizations that were trying to implement technology, simply because this human factor was not considered or it was overlooked. And so I went down that journey of trying to understand change management and then realized, okay, change management falls short. Training and traditional buy-in falls short. So let's take a look at a deeper level, how individuals can be impacted. And understanding, what I call the brain code, understanding how people make decisions, what drives them to make decisions. And oftentimes we think people are rational, they make decisions based on rational. So if you give them, we're told this in the business world, especially as consultants, so often, data-driven decision-making, present your use case, present past successes, and you will convince your leadership, you will convince your stakeholders. But people make decisions based on emotion. And connecting with them on that emotional level, understanding what emotion is driving the decision, whether it is curiosity, fear, joy, whatever that may be, understanding that underlying element. And you always have in every room, every group of stakeholder, you have at least one or two people that are driven by fear. And this is where you get that resistance, where someone says, it's not going to work in our environment. You have someone saying, yeah, we've tried this before. It's never going to work. It's not for us. So this resistance comes from a perspective of fear, whether the person feels I'm going to, not be relevant in this environment, or I don't understand the technology and I don't want to be seen as not understanding it. I might be basically replaced at some point. So there are a lot of these elements playing in, especially if we look at global trends where companies really are trying to replace human resources with technology, with AI systems. So it's something that needs to be truly represented and understood by technologists, why people do what they do and how can we impact those decisions.
I love that. I think you're right. I think so many decisions are based on emotion, at least influenced heavily by emotion, right? And so it's not just about reasoning your way to make a sale or to get buy-in or to get adoption. Reason only takes you so far. You have to kind of understand that. And I think it's a topic that's I'm surprised in some ways that it's not discussed more, right? Because when you think about consumers and consumer behavior, people talk about neuroscience and like human psychology, consumer psychology all the time, right? We're influenced by certain types of ads that really hit us at an emotional level to make a purchase decision. But when it comes to business and business adoption or selling into enterprise, you don't quite have as much of that discussion. For some reason now, businesses are rational. You have analytics that drive decision making and outcomes. And yes, maybe there is a little bit more rigor there versus maybe consumer behavior, but emotions are still a huge part of the equation.
And this is the key point as well. I think you raise a really critical point here when we talk about analytics and insights from data. What we're looking for is not just the data, but we're looking for the insights that tell us how people are thinking and what drives those decisions and what kind of feelings and emotions and motivations are driving them. And that's where we identify ways to impact those decisions that, in the direction that we would like, for example. And so some of the things that I found really effective, we're told, for example, storytelling is a good way to shift mindsets. And there is a neuroscientific explanation or background to that as well, because storytelling triggers emotions. You connect with people on an emotional level. Storytelling can also create familiarity. When you share with someone something that's familiar to them, or you have something in common with them, it creates familiarity. Familiarity is what drives people to decide towards what you want as well. So you can kind of drive decision points, drive digital transformation success by getting people on board quicker. And so this is some of the elements that we've been able to use successfully.
Where do things go wrong? Because I think your template makes a lot of sense on how to do this well. But we see and we hear about failures all the time, I'm sure as you do. So when things do go wrong, where do they typically go wrong?
They go wrong in many different places because digital transformation involves organization-wide change. There could be many key dependencies and elements that kind of shift or impact the outcome. One key element is really not having your leadership buy-in. So you need to have top-down buy-in for organization-wide change. If you're taking a transformation or a tech implementation from bottom up, there's a certain level where you reach and you have that limitation. You can't go beyond that. You can impact a certain function, a certain business area, but not organization-wide. So leadership buy-in is critical. And here having leadership teams that are having an abundance mindset that understands the exponential potential of what these technologies can bring, that's really crucial. Another key area is looking at digital transformation as a project, right? A start date, an end date, a certain budget, and then an implementation. It's an evolutionary process. So digital transformation evolves with your organization. As you get more digitally mature, as you implement more solutions, you need to then relook at where your kind of North Star is, and that has to be reevaluated and shifted as well. And it goes along a very dynamic process. It's not an annual strategic planning process. Many organizations still have that. Whereas technology is developing at such a rapid pace, you can't have this yearly planning. You need to be more dynamic with that. So all of these types of elements really contribute to failures within transformation. Another key one is really too much focus on the technology itself. thinking of tech as a silver bullet solution that's going to come in and resolve all of your business challenges. The tech is not the solution. The tech is an enabler. And it enables you to achieve certain goals, but you need to be clear what those goals are.
I think that makes a lot of sense. There are many ways that things could fail, and I think that's a great rundown of some of the common ones. I think digital transformation often is described as a 3 or 5 year journey. It's very long in terms of time scale, but a lot of the experiments that happen are on a shorter time scale, sometimes months, sometimes a year, a little bit over a year. How do you run experiments? How do you run tests that perhaps some of them don't go well, right? And then they create some level of discouragement or disillusionment. But some of those experiments are failures that are part of that longer journey to getting to success. How do you manage that? Because I think one of the common things that we hear and see is organizations try something, it doesn't go well, doesn't meet expectations, and then they kind of forfeit that entirely because they just had a really bad experience. I think when it comes to company building and startups, often the message is you want to go and keep experimenting as quickly as possible. You want to have velocity learnings because then you will find a way to succeed in a subject to, of course, having the right idea and capital to kind of withstand the pressures there. But experimentation is part of the journey. People kind of embrace it. And how do enterprises approach this with a mindset that makes it possible for them to overcome failures along the way?
I had this conversation recently with CEO of one of the companies we're working with, and it's about looking at experimentation, not like putting your finger in the fire as a little child and learning never to touch the fire again. You have to understand experimentation, part and parcel of that is really failure. You fail, you learn quickly, you might fail again, you learn quickly, but it's just making sure that those failure rounds are faster, that you're learning faster and you're iterating and kind of developing quickly. And digital transformation requires that. If you think about digital transformation being this kind of larger evolutionary process and machinery that's, a longer term piece that keeps evolving. Within that, you might have the little gears that are shifting around, and these are your initiatives. It could be culture change, it could be process optimization, it could be a tech implementation, whatever that might be. Some of these might fall off, but the larger machinery needs to keep going. And every piece that falls off provides you a learning for this larger piece. Okay, this didn't work. Why didn't it work? Okay, I understand now. Let's use this learning for the next piece. And so it does require a shift in mindset from the traditional organization structures to think about your business as kind of a living organism that's kind of moving and evolving and transforming at the same time. And I think this is where companies get stuck because they feel like the one failure is going to define me. And we've got centuries of reward systems built within organizations that punish us with consequences for failure. And so we've built and kind of conditioned people within the workforce, employees, to recognize failure as, there's consequence, so there's negative consequence, and there's we shouldn't fail. And so another big element around psychology is this aversion to failure. People are more afraid to fail than they are of the potential of success. And so even if I tell you there's a 20% chance you might fail, but an 80% chance you might succeed, you'll be afraid of that 20% more than you'll be excited about the 80%. This is human nature. And so we need to kind of shift away from that mindset and realize that, failure is kind of it's something that happens. We've got to accept that and just go with the flow. The question is, how smart are you with those failures? Not losing too much resources, losing too much time, losing too much investment. And that means really having a certain leeway and very quickly early warning systems to recognize, all right, this is not going to work. Let's shift. Let's pivot.
I love that. I think that makes sense. Keep the failures more measured. Make sure you learn from them. You're not wasting a lot of time and capital. But I think velocity and learning as quickly as possible around something that's net new in the market, I think is super critical. I think one of our guests in our earlier podcast said, basically starting too late is the same as just not starting at all, right? You want to go get started, even if some of that initial bit is more like kind of your kind of investment in learning, right? You learn a lot, and then therefore your next subsequent investments are more valuable. But basically, standing still is not an option, essentially, right? In this competitive market, I think things are happening very quickly. I get it; it is confusing, it is challenging. I mean, even generative AI, you have things like chatbots, Copilot, now agentic AI agents have become really hot. They're and dozens of ways to go and do and build. And if you just even get bogged down in the technology, it becomes quickly overwhelming. And then you have to navigate how to get adoption in the organization, how to make sure it ties to some of the business values you have and objectives. So it is daunting. I get that. But I think experimentation is super pivotal. And I think something you mentioned earlier I want to touch on is storytelling. It feels like that is critical, both internally and externally, particularly if you run a very large public organization where you have to tell the public markets, you have to tell internal stakeholders, you have to get buy-in on multiple layers and levels. Could you talk a little bit about storytelling and how important it is to drive some of the psychological changes that need to happen for this to work out?
That is a really great question. And I think it's so critical and important. People always talk about storytelling, but they don't talk really about what storytelling is. And I can kind of share an analogy around that. If we consider change within your organization or your workplace is associated with, I think, one of the top 3 biggest stresses in people's lives. The level of uncertainty that we face within our work environment can create such a level of uncertainty that it kind of disrupts us, not just at work, but in our private lives as well. And so this is such an important element to think about. You've got this huge fear, and I can share a story about that, where if you imagine someone's at the water cooler and this whole rumor mill about AI implementation, and a colleague comes over and says, hey, you know what? I heard people are going to get laid off. And we don't know when, we don't know how many people, we don't know whom, but it's going to happen soon because of AI. And there you have this ripple effect within the organization. We've actually seen this happen where people stop being productive because this fear factor and this level of uncertainty has become so massive. It's this giant unspoken piece in the room, elephant in the room. And leadership team is not addressing the elephant in the room. So it's constantly there. You can't see clearly. You don't have this vision of what we need to do next. You can't be productive. And it's a huge detrimental element within an organization. And so I like to share this analogy about my daughter. When she was around 4 years old, she had a fear of the monster under her bed. So this was the big elephant in the room for her. There's a monster under her bed. She couldn't go to sleep. And it was such a huge challenge. And so with storytelling, what we did was basically we turned that, this big dark creature this level of uncertainty that she couldn't pinpoint and couldn't see, we turned that into something tangible. We gave the monster a name. We called it Harry. And we said, Harry's living under the bed. That's his home. And we put a name to it. We created a story, a backstory around Harry moved here because he had to live somewhere and he liked this house. And so we created this kind of emotional story around the monster. And soon, within a day or 2, she started saying goodnight to Harry and going to sleep. And so for me, this was the perfect analogy for storytelling within organizations. It's addressing the monster in the room and giving it a story and telling that story in an emotional way that people connect with it. And you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to know exactly what's going to happen when AI is implemented or if people are going to get laid off. But you need to address the elephant in the room, and you need to address it from a storytelling perspective to connect with people emotionally. And that's when you get buy-in and you kind of take people on that journey with you. Let me show you this journey of AI. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Let me tell you, I'm afraid as well. And you have so little vulnerability at the leadership level oftentimes, where they're afraid as well, but they don't recognize it or they don't share that with employees. And this is what I talked about earlier in creating psychological safety. It has to come with these elements.
I love that, Kamalas. Really, really appreciate that. For our viewers that would love to learn more about what you do, as well as read some of your books, what's the best place to find more information?
So you can find me on lardipartner.com or kamaleslardi.com. And I'm very active on LinkedIn as well. Just look for my name, Kamalas Lardi.
Excellent. We'll make sure to include that in our show notes. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thanks for the conversation.
Thank you so much, Ankur. It's been a pleasure as well.